your occupation, Miss Green?
I'm a claims investigator for an insurance company.
Employed by?
Sovereign Life and General Assurance Company, Headingley, Leeds.
Did the defendant, Peter John Elgar, have a policy with that firm?
He had two policies. A comprehensive motor vehicle policy for his van and a fire and accidental policy for his shop premises.
And did he make a claim on the latter policy following a fire at the premises of Elgar and Stroud on September 22nd last?
Yes, he did.
And were you appointed by your firm to investigate that claim?
I was.
And during the course of your investigation, Miss Green, did you meet the defendant?
Yes, I travelled from Leeds to Fulchester on September the 28th, which was the day after our claims department had received the completed form from Mr. Elgar. I made some inquiries in Fulchester and then arranged to meet Mr. Elgar.
Yes, where did the meeting take place? At the shop?
No, at his home, a cottage at Haley Hill, just outside Fulchester. Mr. Elgar invited me to tea on Sunday the 30th of September. He seemed very tense and nervous, but this was perhaps understandable. I asked him how he believed the fire had started.
Yes, did he give you an answer?
He said he thought it was most likely some electrical fault and that he'd more than once asked the landlords to have the place rewired, but they had not done so. I pointed out to him that in the report by the fire prevention officer, no electrical fault had been found. He said by the time the report was made, the place was so gutted out it would be impossible to tell. I then asked him to let me have further details about each item listed on the claim form as having been lost in the fire.
Did he comply?
Yes, as far as he could.
Well, what sort of details were you asking for?
Signed receipts showing how and when he'd acquired each antique and how much he'd paid for them.
And was he able to give you these?
Very few. He said his papers had all been destroyed in the fire. The only receipts he was able to give me were those he had on him, in his wallet, at the time of the fire. As it happened, those included some of the most valuable antiques, ones which amounted to more than half the total claim.
Yes. Well, did you ask him why those particular receipts happened to be in his wallet at the time of the fire?
There was no need to. The 5 items had been purchased only 2 days before the fire.
So only 2 days before the fire, the defendant acquired 5 valuable antiques, which amounted to more than half the total insurance claim?
Yes.
Well, do you now produce the defendant's insurance claim form? Exhibit 1, my lord.
Yes.
As you will see, my lord, on the list there are 5 items with ticks against them. These represent the items the defendant bought 2 days before the fire, and they add up to a total of £5,100 out of a total claim of £9,600. Now, Miss Green, did the defendant say anything else you considered important?
I didn't notice at the time, but later in my hotel room, when I was listening to a playback of the tape, I noticed
One moment, please. The playback of what?
Of the tape recording, my lord, I made of the conversation.
You made a tape recording of your conversation with the defendant?
Yes. And I noticed that when
Was the defendant aware that this conversation was being recorded?
No, my lord.
You mean you had a tape recorder concealed about your person?
In my handbag, with a microphone here, hidden in a brooch.
Yes, I see. Mr. Parsons, are you intending to put in this tape recording as evidence?
No, my lord. I would point out, however, my learned friend does have a transcript. The only reason the tape has been mentioned at all is because it brought to the attention of the witness to something that she hadn't considered significant at that time.
Yes. Yes, I see. Please continue, Miss Green.
My lord, with respect, if my learned friend is not going to produce that
No,
recording...
Mr. Lotterby, I don't think the tape recording need be produced if the witness has an independent recollection of what the defendant said. Yes, Miss Green, carry on.
I noticed that when I commented on the high price of these 5 particular antiques, 2 of them being valued at well over £1,000 each, Mr. Elgar's reply was, they are actually worth more than that.
Yes, the significance being the use of the present tense. I mean, it was more than a week since they were supposed to have been destroyed in a fire, and he said they are worth more than that.
Yes.
Yes. Now, what did you do when you noticed this?
I drove down to Salisbury to the antique shop where the 5 items had been purchased.
With what object in mind?
To get a detailed description of those antiques from a neutral party and, if possible, to get photographs of them.
Yes. Did you succeed?
Oh, dear, dear me, where are we now? I have a fear that we're going to be faced with hearsay evidence.
Yes, you are, my lord, but only with evidence which the defence does not dispute.
Oh, very well, then let's get on.
Thank you, my lord. Now, did you succeed in getting the description you wanted?
Yes. The Salisbury dealer had photos of 2 of them in a catalogue of an auction sale in April 1973, when he had purchased them himself.
Yes. Do you recall what those 2 antiques were?
Yes, a Pembroke table and a Queen Anne bureau. I had copies of the photos made, enlargements, and sent them to some people I know who have connections in the antique business.
Yes. Now, why did you do that?
Well, just on the off chance that an antique identical to one of those might put in an appearance somewhere.
And did it?
They both did. About 2 months later, in the first week of December, I received a phone call saying that a Pembroke table and a Queen Anne bureau, exactly like those in the photos, had been sold to a visiting American agent by a dealer in Chelsea, London. I went to London and visited the dealer, pretending that I was a customer and that one of the things I was interested in was a Queen Anne bureau. He said...
sorry, what was the dealer's name?
Oh, I'm sorry. Richard Hartley.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Hartley said how unfortunate he'd sold one only recently. I asked him where he had acquired it, as they're very hard to find. He said he had acquired it privately and did not wish to give the name. However, as a result of having Mr. Elgar followed, it turned out to be...
What exactly did that mean, having Mr. Elgar followed?
I had hired a firm of private detectives in Fulchester to keep watch on his movements.
At whose expense?
The firm's, my lord. Sovereign Life and General Assurances.
I see. Well, carry on.
On the 10th of December last, Mr. Elgar travelled by train to London, where he had a meeting with Mr. Hartley in a restaurant, during which a photo was taken of them.
Yes. My lord, I would draw your attention to a photograph of the defendant in a London restaurant with Mr. Richard Hartley, which is exhibited in the deposition of the private detective.
Yes.
Now, what was your next move, Miss Green?
I returned to Fulchester and went to see Mr. Elgar, this time without an invitation. This was on the 14th of December. I told him I had reason to believe that some of the most valuable antiques listed on his claim form had not been destroyed in the fire and had recently been sold in London. He denied it. I said I believed they'd been sold by a Mr. Hartley. He denied any knowledge of Hartley. I said I believed he'd recently travelled to London to see Mr. Hartley. He denied it. I then showed him the photo.
And what did he say?
Oh, for a long time he didn't say anything. He just stared into space, like in a trance. I then told him I was sending in my report on his claim, and that it would contain evidence that he had made false statements with intent to defraud the company of several £1,000s, and that I had reason to believe he had set fire to the shop himself.
Yes, and what was his reaction to that?
Well, nothing for a while. He just sat there, nodding his head slightly. And then when I turned to go, he jumped up and came over and asked me. He said, please, not to send in my report. He would waive all his claim. He wouldn't even claim on the stuff that had really been damaged in the fire. Well, I told him to forget it. The whole claim was null and void any road, and it was a matter for the police. He said it was the first time he'd ever done anything like this. He said that his mother was very old and ill, and it would be the death of her.
And what did you say to that?
Me? I just laughed in his face and said, don't bother to see me out.
Yes. My lord, perhaps I should remind the jury at this stage that the defendant, Peter John Elgar, has pleaded guilty to a charge of attempting to obtain by deception in respect of a fraudulent insurance claim.
Yes.
Thank you, Miss Green. No further questions.
Miss Green, how long have you been an insurance company investigator?
How long? Oh, about 1.5 years.
You enjoy the work?
Yes, it's a very good job.
It's a rather odd profession, isn't it, for an attractive young woman like yourself?
What you mean is that it's the sort of job everyone takes for granted has to be done by a man. I think that's what's odd.
Yes. Yes, in fact, I suppose your sex is an advantage in this sort of work.
Sometimes, yes.
People might speak more freely to you than to a man.
Possibly.
And they might be less likely to suspect what you're up to.
What I'm up to?
Yes, well, I mean things like hiring a private detective to follow someone and take photos of them without their knowledge, carrying a tape recorder concealed in your handbag in order to bug someone's conversation. All the tricks of your trade.
Yes. What about it?
And, of course, in addition to that, as a woman, you have the advantage of feminine intuition, don't you? Do you believe in that?
In feminine intuition?
Yes, you find it helps you in your work.
My lord, I really
Yes,
can't see
Mr. Parsons. Mr. Lotterby, have you any idea where these questions are leading us?
I have, my lord.
Oh, would you like to share your idea with the rest of the court?
I shall endeavour to do so, my lord. Miss Green, you added at the end of your report the following sentence. And I have reason to believe he had set fire to the shop himself.
Yes.
Was it feminine intuition made you say that?
No, not just intuition, of course not.
Oh, had you some tangible reason other than those you've already given us?
Well, for one thing, the coincidence. The fantastic coincidence that only 2 days before the fire, he purchased these very valuable antiques, which he included in his claim, although they were not in the shop at the time of the fire. Why weren't they? And here's another thing. That shop was locked from the outside. He was the only person who had the keys. So who could have got in and started the fire? Only him.
Unless it was started by some accidental means. Oh, there is one more thing I wanted to ask you. At your meeting with the defendant, your second and last meeting at his home, was there anyone else present?
Yes.
Yes, you didn't mention that before.
I wasn't asked.
Well, I'm asking you now. Was there anyone else present?
His mother.
Yes. Now, when you told the defendant that you were making a report out to your company that he had made a fraudulent claim and that you had reason to believe he had set fire to the shop himself, what did his mother say? Did she say anything?
Oh, I don't recall. She may have done.
Well, I'm asking you to recall. Did she say anything?
She said something. I didn't take notice. I wasn't there to see her.
Miss Green, didn't the defendant's mother say that her son couldn't possibly have started the fire because he was home with her all evening, that the first he knew of it was when they received a phone call at 9:20?
Yes, well, she would say that, wouldn't she?
Never mind whether she would, Miss Green, did she?
She said something to that effect, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Miss Green.
Do you wish to... Thank you, Miss Green. You may go.
I call Gerald Stroud.
Gerald Stroud, please.
The case of the Queen against Elgar will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.